Heroes of the Borderlands, The Caves of Chaos. This is a review of the new version for Keep on the Borderlands, which was originally a first edition adventure. This version is set to and released for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. It was written originally by Gary Gygax, one of the original creators of D&D. Now, I'll note this is the cover of the original adventure, showing adventurers fighting what it might be some orcs and things like that. I'll even show you the original map, the blue map of the adventure. And I think this is important as they have made a significant number of changes to this adventure for 5th edition. Some people that are purists will want to run Keep on the Borderlands just like it was in the original game. If you want to do that, it should work fine. You can actually run Keep on the Borderlands in 5th edition with very little changes from the original 1st edition. All you have to do is switch out the monsters, all of which are in the 2014 and 2024 Monsters Manual. The only exceptions are, say, a couple of priests and acolytes that you can bring in to replace some of the enemies in this area over here and by 58, or just use the updated versions that are in the Heroes of the Borderlands adventure. Now, I will, for this adventure, reference some of the things in the original adventure, in this case, this particular map, even show some of the art from it and all that, but I'm not going to go into detail of the original adventure. You can see how dense the text is, like it is in many first edition adventures, and the art is problematic sometimes, as is the adventure itself in some ways. Now, going back real quick, you see some really interesting artwork. This is the sort of where the caves are from the perspective of someone arriving there, where this, very aggressive looking kobold is. This is an amazing piece of art, by the way, an illustration. And I have to give credit where credit is due. They've very much updated all the art in this adventure and had some amazing pieces. And I come from an illustration background by saying that. I'll also show you the updated exterior map, which you can use if you're running this online or just print this out for your characters. And it just shows you the different caves. I'll note, show the player characters a version that doesn't have the suggested level in each cave. I mean, as a DM, you don't want your player characters at first level jumping into cave K, which is for third level characters for the most part, or cave G, which is for third level characters as well. You can imply that that might be extremely dangerous. I personally, if you imply it left and right and show that there are bones everywhere and dead adventurers laying outside or halfway in the cave, the players still go in, well, let them deal with the consequences. Players should learn that the hard way sometimes. Now, if you look at the original map, you will see the differences. It's not a bad thing that they changed it, and of course, the new version has been updated dramatically. I'll note there is some more modern redrawn maps that third-party creators have done of Keep on the Borderlands. Some of them are utterly beautiful, and you can look them up online. I'm sure you'll be able to find them. I won't name the creators themselves, but you can easily find them that show both the exterior map and the interior map. In fact, I used one of them when I ran Keep on the Borderlands as a beginning of an ongoing Greyhawk campaign. This adventure, by the way, does sort of fit Greyhawk, but it's not necessarily meant to fit in any adventure. Some people have put it in Mystera. You can really squeeze it into any campaign you like, as long as it's somewhere out in the middle of nowhere on the quote borderlands between different lands, and really in the hinterlands, if you want to call it that as well. The overall adventure involves 11 caves, again, that are in this little valley or gorge. Each cave is inhabited by a different type of creature. Now, in the updated version, these are more the adult creatures for the most part. Now, I note they have also changed some of the caves. For example, Cave C is now a Nothix layer, Cave B is now a Mephits layer. The original adventure works a bit differently. I think there's actually 2 goblin layers, but they wanted to change things up probably for good reason. Again, a purist will say, no, that's not how the adventure worked. Well, if you want to run it as the original adventure was, like I said, it's very easy to run it that way. But I think they've made some fairly good choices to clean up aspects of the old adventure and make it a little more easier to run for a more modern audience. The concept is the same though. You have a hobgoblin cave, a kobold cave. You have some information about each cave as well in the beginning of this adventure, and then they all correspond to a cave on the map. The DM could give the player characters some information before they arrive at the Caves of Chaos. In fact, going back to the original adventure, it is called Keep on the Borderlands because it begins at the Keep on the Borderlands, which is an extensive location nearby. Now, I'm going through all this detail. I don't expect you to go through it yourself because I want to get to a couple of the images. This map is not included in the new adventure, but you can find more updated versions of it. This is the area around the keep and where the caves actually are. Now, again, you don't have to use this, but I suggest using a version of it if you can. Here's where the keep is itself. This is in the Borderlands. This is easy to put somewhere in any campaign because it's just in the middle of nowhere. There's this winding river. There's some swamps down here. There's more forest. There's this cave called the Cave of the Unknown, and which could be anything you put in there. And then the Caves of Chaos are over here. There are some other locations scattered around the Keep on the Borderlands and the Caves of Chaos, but the 5th edition version of it focuses entirely on the Caves of Chaos. A lot of old 1st edition adventures focused on the starting town for some reason. Now, note, this is what the keep originally looked like. It was very Spartan and, well, you used it as a base of operations. The player characters were not meant to stay there for very long. Now, I will note it was recently updated, very recently, by a very prominent D&D map maker who you can look it up. I won't say his name, but you can look it up. This is the updated map he created recently, and you can see his Patreon here. Feel free to follow him. I would suggest it. And this is the updated version of the Keep on the Borderlands. This creator makes some utterly amazing maps to use for your campaigns. I don't think he's updated the old or new version of the Caves of Chaos, but if you want to use the Keep based on his maps, or just use someone else's maps. He's not the only person who's worked on this, but it looks fantastic and it gives you more of a starting location where you can have your adventures begin, or just put it anywhere. It doesn't really matter that much. Now, going into the actual caves, again, you can see when the player characters get to the caves or the gorge. In the original map, there's a lot more trees and it's much more forested. Here, it's a little more ruined. There's a lot of dead trees and these pools of water. Again, either one will work just fine. Player characters are going to have the option of going into different caves. And the reason I bring up the Keep on the Borderlands itself is maybe, in my opinion and from experience, it's a good idea to give the players a little bit of background about the caves. Like maybe they were made as originally as, mining shafts, which makes sense by local humans before they were taken over by, quote, demi-humans. Or maybe the players get a little bit of information from a different town or just from the locals that say, well, there's some caves on the north that are inhabited by kobolds, or there's a cave up on the higher edge there's some weirder activity, or there's a minotaur lingering in the deep western side cave. Give the player characters a little bit information before they come into the area. Otherwise, they're going to pick a cave at random, and they might pick a very dangerous cave, or in the very least, imply that some of the caves might be more deadly than others. I believe Cave E here is the Ogre Cave, and there should be a lot more bones out there, or evidence that there might be an ogre in there. A first level character group that isn't like 7 or 8 player characters fighting an ogre might easily get killed. They might survive if there's a lot of them, but it also could be very deadly. Also, in the new version, they've included a red dragon wormling in there. It's not part of the original adventure, but it's interesting that they've done that. And then again, the player characters should have the choice of going to different caves, but from experience, give them at least some clues or rumors about what could be in each cave first. Unless you really want to go the hard way and let them figure it out and make some serious mistakes and possibly have to roll up some new characters at some point. Now, going into the actual adventure, each cave is in 5th edition at least got its own individual creatures, and it's got its own little submap for each creatures. And I'll show you a couple of the maps here, but I won't go into super detail. This is the new Kobold map. It's actually pretty similar to the original, although there are some differences. This is the DM's map with all the locations where the creatures begin. The way this is laid out really reminds me of how 4th edition maps were laid out. And I know some people will groan hearing about 4th edition ever, but they were laid out very well and it was very organized in the same manner. Very easy to run in some ways, considering how complicated that system was. Here's a pit trap here. There's just kobolds everywhere, the scheming and plotting, and there's some other things in the cave. Again, there are some differences from the original. I believe this is a little smaller, but it's a good little starting location, especially if the player characters are not very experienced with D&D, to fight, aggressive kobolds, unless there are kobolds in their group, or maybe even mingle with the kobolds. Maybe the kobolds are warring with another group here, and the player characters are able to interact with them a little bit more. But who knows? There's a lot you can actually do here if you really want to do those kind of things. But if you look on the map here, you get some of the traps and information. You get some great art from what the different kobolds will look like, which is great if you're playing with brand new players and they've never seen a kobold before. Showing them the new artwork is just fantastic. That's not a centipede, or it is a centipede, I should say. I thought it was a Karen crawler for a second. A giant centipede, which again is a fun piece of art and would be a very aggressive enemy for the player characters to fight. This adventure also notes that some creatures are indifferent or hostile, versus the original adventure, everything is just hostile. And the original adventure, most notoriously, the caves are inhabited not just by combatants, like in this case, they would be the male kobolds and goblins, but also the women and children. They have removed the women and children from this whole adventure. The reason why is it's extremely problematic and it leads to a lot of moral questions whether or not the player character's actions are actually evil or not, because all you're doing is going into a bunch of cave homes of a bunch of demi-humans, quote unquote, and slaughtering at least half of them and then getting XP and stealing all their stuff. The new adventure kind of makes it where each one of these groups is up to no good, and it's much a little more less problematic is the best way to put it. There's some evil going on, but there isn't as much as many issues with going into these caves and dealing with these goblins and kobolds that there used to be. Now you will find that in one of the first caves there is a copper dragon wormling recently hatched. He doesn't even know his name. This is a cool concept. It's not in the original adventure, but the idea is he doesn't know anything for the most part yet. And he's basically going to end up as the player character's pet, probably, or he'll fly away. The player characters have the option of, honestly, if they give him some treasure, giving him a name as well. And he could be their little copper dragon and could be quite useful. Hopefully, they don't just use him as a meat shield. Now, one of the newer locations is also the Mephit's Lair. This is somewhere in here. It's one of the areas that's been changed where it was a different creature's lair at one point, but now it's for Mephits, which makes sense. The original adventure was mostly just humanoids that you'd fight of different types, and so they've mixed it up a little bit. There's a mimic here. There's a steam Mephic. They added some Keatua. They've kind of mixed it up a little bit more, and you get some again pretty great artwork here. You go further, you get this Keatua, which against this what I assume is the moon, and although there's no there's no water here, I don't know why this would come into play in this case. They're just here though. That's what's important. Keatua Marauders, which are might be a little bit difficult for first level characters, maybe. There's this excellent and amazing blue mimic image, which I think is one of the best looking mimics I've ever seen. It's really fantastic. And then we go on to the next layer. Now, I'll note, by the way, the layers in 5th edition versus the 1st edition ones are, again, much smaller. It's almost like they're designed to be run in about 3 to 4 hours, which is the average time of a normal D&D play session. If you run this adventure like that, with that intention, you can probably run the Keep on the Borderlands more or less in 11 or 12 3 or 4 hour play sessions, and which is kind of how I ended up running it when I ran the original version in 5th edition. Again, if you want to run the original version in 5th edition, it's going to run fine. And you'll probably get the same amount of play sessions, maybe even a little bit more because it's got a little more hallways and dead ends to explore than the new version. Now, in this case, they also include the Nothic, which is a creature that came out after first edition, which replaces some stuff. There's an animated flying sword that's in here as well, and I'll kind of show some of these caves here. At some point, I might review the original adventure in its by itself and make some comparisons. But again, this is based on this version. They've changed the maps in some ways, and again, a purist might have an issue with that, but both adventures are fine. As you look more into it, you get this great image of a Karen crawler. I seem to recall there was a Karen crawler in the original adventure. I could be mistaken. This awesome, fantastic image of a flying sword, although it's very interesting that the background is blurred, which is a photographic technique, even though this is an illustration, but it works for this particular drawing and it's fantastic. And just different treasures and locations the player characters can explore in each of these little areas. And you get to a goblin lair, which this probably was one of the original goblin lairs. I believe the goblin lairs, there was like two or three of them, and they were more connected. It's notable as well that in a lot of these places in this adventure and the original, there are secret doors connecting different areas. This secret door connects to the Ogre Cave area, and this tunnel connects off to Cave F, which originally had a lot more goblins in it. Originally, again, they were much larger and you could explore just bigger areas, but this works fine for the overall theme of the adventure, having run essentially the original version in 5th edition. Now, one thing I like about this particular version is they added a lot more role playing opportunities. In this case, there's a dwarven captive, Vince, who was spelunking in the area and could be a useful NPC, maybe even a NPC that might fight with the player characters. Perhaps she is essentially the player character's next tank that'll help them fight off these creatures and help them out if their group is too small. Things like that happen in D&D. There are these additional drawings of random goblins that kind of flesh them out a little bit, so they're not just a standard goblin. They have their own little bits of personality. I particularly love this drawing right here of this goblin with a weird hat and all that. You get into the ogre cave, and again, they've expanded it a little bit. The original was quite simple, but it now has more or less, it kind of had two rooms to begin with, but now it really has two rooms. They made it much clearer than the original that it is two rooms, and there is a secret door. You get the ogre himself, who looks very ogre like and imposing and intimidating. And yeah, it's a fantastic image again. You get information of trying to, if you want to deceive or make persuasion checks against him. I like that they've included stuff like this because it gives you the more of the option of trying to negotiate with creatures like this, and they're not outright going to attack the player characters, or at least there's a chance that the player characters could get some information from this particular creature, or at least prevent a battle from just happening out of nowhere. You go further in, by the way, and I noted there is this red dragon wormling who is probably more dangerous than the ogre himself, as he's worth over 1,000 XP. Cindertooth, he is going to be a problem, and the DM might want, if the group is too low level, maybe have him burn the player characters or claw at them, and maybe just fly away and come back later, and be something like a fight that is going to happen later. You tease it a little bit early, and then it comes back. Now we go further. We get the Hobgoblin Lair, which I think it used to be part of the Goblin Lair. It's been a while since I actually ran it, but it connects to the Goblin Lair one way or another. And again, you get the entrance. You get this kind of standard image of a Hobgoblin. There is apparently a gelatinous cube down here doing its thing, back and forth. It's a standard low-level creature. You get just different caves with different goblin-related creatures and all that. Now, again, I'm rushing through some of these because a lot of the creatures are very standard. The rooms are very basic, but if you're running D&D for the first time, and especially 5th edition, and you want an adventure that's easy to run, this is a lot easier to run. I'll note as well, if you're trying to run the original 1st edition version, it will not have any descriptive text. All the text is very condensed. It doesn't have any of this stuff. Later adventures in D&D got descriptive text. Some DMs hate descriptive text. You don't have to use it if you don't want, although I personally use it all the time if it's there because it's quite interesting and gives the adventure a little more color and just details in general. But again, the original adventure didn't have any of that, so it's nice that they've included that. Now you go eventually into the Shunned Caves. Shunned Caves. There's an owlbear in one of them. I seem to recall there was an owlbear in the original as well. It was something you didn't fight originally at first level, but they've connected the cave a little more to some of the more advanced caves. These are sort of the deeper advanced caves. This stairway goes steeply up to one of the one of the more dangerous areas. But now there's a ledge that drops down to where the owlbear is, and I like that they've made this connection a little bit more, and you can kind of mingle between the areas a little bit more, wander between them, and essentially get from one cave to another, sort of the back ways, a little bit more than you could in the original. Again, if I go to the original adventure and I show you the original maps, you can see that there are, once I get up here, there are some connections there, but not quite as many. I think this was the Owlbear Cave right here, and it might have been, well, it was either the Owlbear Cave or it was where you fought the Minotaur, one of the two. One of them was up here. In any case, they don't really connect to this area right here, which is where they connect more or less in the new cave. You'll note again, these tunnels are more winding. There's a lot more dead ends in the original adventure. You fought hobgoblins in this area, the original, and the originally goblins were over here too. And I think you also encountered goblins here. Again, they've simplified things probably for the best, although some people like the more expansive caves, of course. But you also get some really fantastic artwork here. I think this might be a gray ooze or something like that. It's a very disturbing. It's a gray ooze glob, apparently. It's interesting. Get this fun image of an owlbear itself. Nice little image. You get this white character here who's pretty terrifying. He looks like a undead Santa Claus. Definitely show the images like this. They're fantastic as you're getting into crypts and everything that kind of change the pace of what you're encountering here. You get to the bugbear area, which there is a bugbear area in the original adventure, in just different rooms the player characters can go into, some traps and all that. And again, it connects to this other cave, Cave Eye, via the secret door here, which I think it does in the original adventure as well. And you fight bugbears there. It's pretty self-explanatory. I'm noticing in this adventure or this version, there's these standard images of a bugbear in a cave or a goblin in a cave and things like that. This is done by the same artist, which works, although some of these images are obviously better than others. The guy with the goblin with the hat was the best one. Now, as you go further, again, each one of these locations has a little bit of treasure the player characters will find. Some treasure is better than others. None of it is really broken items. In this case, it says use this table to roll a random item. I actually think this is a better idea than just a standard stuff laying around because it adds a little bit of variability and unexpectedness to the adventure. If the player characters, you could have the player characters, for example, let them roll, and then if they they have to take what they can get, but if they could potentially use their inspiration to re-roll, although I wouldn't necessarily tell them that the higher level stuff is better stuff. You could just tell them it's random, and they get what they get. So it could be a little more interesting. But we get to the Minotaur lair. Again, there is a Minotaur in the original adventure. It's one of the most dangerous areas. I like that they simplified it a bit more than they did than the original, and it probably works better. It feels a little bit more like a labyrinth with these broken pillars and things like that scattered around the area. The Minotaur himself is in here somewhere. There's some sturges. They're standard. Here's some fire beetles, standard low level creatures. Here's the Minotaur, who looks absolutely insane, and I think his stats are the hostile Minotaur Baphomet from 2024. If you're running from 2014, just use a standard Minotaur. Again, it will work fine. You don't need to change it. Works great. You get his treasure and stuff like that. And again, this version of the adventure, the treasure is a random magic item using a table. And again, it works fine. It's just a little bit different and adds some variability to the adventure. And you get the Knoll area, which, in my opinion, is very different from the original maps in the original adventure, but I don't have a problem with that. You get more sort of square rooms, and it just feels a little more organized and more like a temple than the original, which just felt like more cave-like areas. And again, there are hostile creatures wandering around here. Not having the women and children present really makes this more of an adventure and less of dealing with moral conflicts. You could put some of that back into the adventure if you want to have the players decide whether or not what they're doing is right or wrong and what they want to do with those creatures. The original adventure, the player characters have to make decisions about that, and player characters back in the day might have made decisions that were, let's just say, kind of dark. Some of my player characters chose some dark paths as to what to do with them. Others decided to try to help these now orphaned bugbear children and teach them things. And there's other issues with having that in the adventure, though. So is a reason why they kind of cut that, I think. Again, you get standard. What does a knoll look like for new player characters? And here's another one. You get this. What does a zombie look like? And kind of a cool image of a zombie of an acolyte or priest covered in bells. And this is going to be a very loud zombie and easy to hear from down the hall. You eventually get to the Shrine of Evil Chaos, which is the finale area in both this version of the adventure and the original. Essentially, it's much smaller, but it's an evil temple to an evil god. I think the original one, it is Theresden or something like that. It doesn't have to be that. In this version, you get an ogre zombie, which is not in the original. The original has a lot more just random zombies and skeletons, but there are a few rooms with zombies and skeletons here. But I like that they mixed it up a little bit. You get this priest or evil priest here who I like that they gave him some original art. He's got some personality. This is Narthis, who is in the original adventure. He's one of the main bosses. You get some undead skeletons and all that, some images of them. You get this priestess, Isvlis, or priest, I'm not sure. She, I guess, who is here doing evil things or something, or, chaotic things, perhaps, because she's part of a cult of chaos. It's Caves of Chaos. And you get, again, treasure. Each little area has its own treasure. That's pretty much the entire adventure. Now, the only thing is I'll note, if you kind of go through some of these maps, you can see where each location is. And again, they're almost like little standalone mini adventures that are connected by the main map and have little back entrances to each other. So they're not completely standalone. And you can see the map, or the image here coming from the entrance of the gorge to the different caves and all that. I would definitely show an image like this of the player characters. Another thing I would do as a DM that I did in my version of the adventure is have a battle take place out here in the valley, like perhaps if the player characters are coming and going, camping somewhere else, maybe doing just a wilderness battle out here where they have to deal with some of the goblins outside of the cave or some creatures outside of the cave. And that way it's not all in the cave and there's some unexpected stuff. Now, I'll go back to the original adventure just a little bit and just kind of skim through some things. Again, I'm not going to review everything here. I'm just going to show some of the artwork and some of the differences. Overall, I feel here's the Minotaur. Again, the new version of the Minotaur is probably a lot better. The original version appears to wear what looks like chainmail. As you kind of look through the original version, you can see that you mostly get these dense blocks of text. Here's the Temple of Evil Chaos, where Narthus, or whatever his name was, and the evil priest and all that, and priestess that are there. You get some of the standard items that were in the original adventure that are now more randomized and stuff like that. And again, if you want to run this in this version of D&D, almost all the creatures and all the magic items are in 5th edition at this point. I think the only items you'll find that aren't are the protections from the scroll of protection from undead. Well, that might actually be in here. The amulet of protection from good might be the only thing that's not really in the original in 5th edition at the moment, but you might have to come up with a version of that for 5th edition or something similar to that. Or there might be this, I'm not sure if the wand of enemy detection is currently in the game. I think they cut the Medusa out of the original adventure because it might be too dangerous for those player characters of that level. You could bring in some of these creatures if you want as a follow up, like, say, the player characters come and go a few times and you want to draw some creatures in from the original adventure, like bring the Medusa in, or like have another group of monsters that are coming in to replenish the ranks, or they're coming there to trade with the various creatures around the caves of chaos. I think there's some ghouls originally in the original adventure. Maybe a ghoul shows up. um, you get some other details here, tips from the players. You get some, different chambers the player characters can explore in the original, and you get this image of the keep itself. Which again, this version doesn't really have anything to do with the keep. It's all about the caves of chaos. Now, after looking through this version of the adventure, I would say overall, a scale of 1 to 5, it's a 3.75. I would have rated the original adventure either a 2.75 or a 3. Solid. The reason why I say it's a 3.75 is this is a very sort of combat heavy adventure, which you can't really get away from that. It's meant to be like that. A lot of Gary Gygax's adventures were like that. But unlike the original, they do try to add some extra role playing possibilities into the adventure. And where the original adventure had a lot of problematic aspects with the various women and children living there as well, this adventure probably wisely removes that and allows the player characters to just deal with the combatants and the various, you know, schemes and things that these various orcs and goblinoids are coming up with. Now, it is interesting that they've included that stuff, but again, it doesn't really deviate too much from that. It is interesting that they've kind of shrunk everything down, so you can probably run the adventure a lot faster. I personally like the more wandering tunnels and all the dead ends. But again, if you want to run the adventure more like first edition using that information, you can, and it'd be quite easy to run. Guys, if you like these reviews, you want to see more of them, check out my other videos, and please like and subscribe. Check out my Patreon if you'd like, and enjoy.